How did you have the courage to ask for help? And I never had a good answer. It's like, I don't know. I don't know. Alan and I were tight. We were buddies. I trusted Alan. I felt safe. And I said, you know what the truth is? Alan and I had already been vulnerable with each other for a year up to that point. I said, the best time to create an umbrella is not when you're stuck out in a thunderstorm. It's when there's no rain.
You're never going to get apple juice out of an orange. Why? Because when life squeezes you, you get what's inside. You get out what's inside. And so if you've been harboring resentment, and here's the problem, a lot of times you don't know you have. Oh yeah? Well, I don't like it when you And it's like, whoa, how long have you been holding on to that?
Next Level Nation, welcome back to another episode of Next Level University, where we help you level up your life, your love, your health, and your wealth. We hope you enjoyed yesterday's episode number 1720, What's the Purpose of Your Deepest Pain? Today, for episode number 1721, The Antidote to Arrogance. So, just a quick disclaimer, this is going to be a very quick episode. Probably
We've really
15
got it together,
minutes
you and
is
I.
what we're aiming for. So if we talk a little bit faster than usual, we'll try not to, but just a heads up that this will be a shorter episode.
I don't intend on talking any faster than I normally do.
Well played, sir. Well played.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's been a week. It's very warm in my office, so I am delusional. I just had myself a Diet Sprite.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, big fan.
Not as good as the good stuff, though.
Honestly, I don't know.
Full Cal
Pretty
Sprite
close.
is the way.
You know what I realized in Scotland? Full Cal soda is way less calories. I think it was like 35 calories for a can of soda.
Why?
Because they don't make it like we do.
No sense.
It felt guilt-free when I was drinking.
They call it pop? What do they call it?
They call it, oh my goodness, no, it was something else. I don't remember. We're wasting our 15 minutes here. I don't remember what it was. All right, this is why I wanted to do this episode, because it's been a long time since we've talked about, and we talk about vulnerability and ego and arrogance all the time, but I think I have a really good example of something that you might think to yourself, that person's arrogant, when in reality, they're just really, really struggling with being vulnerable. I don't think they're intending on being arrogant. I think they're so afraid to look weak in a second that they just overdo it. Used to have a friend, and this friend would come over, and this was the conversation. We'd be playing video games, hanging out. He'd be meandering towards the kitchen, and he'd say, "Hey, brother, I'm going to have a couple Pop-Tarts." And I remember thinking, like, sure, man, you can have some Pop-Tarts. Not that you're asking. You're telling me you're going to have several of my Pop-Tarts. Cool, I'll give you the shirt off my back. I don't care. But that became a pattern where it was like, hey, man, I'm going to have a beer. Hey, man, I'm going to have this. 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 It got to the point where he would literally bring his laundry to my house, his dirty laundry, to wash his clothes in my washer and then dry them in my dryer. Never asked. Just brought them. Then it got to the point where he started to like leave his towels on the floor after he showered and stuff, and then leave his plates around. And then it became an issue. It was like, this is an issue. After reflecting on that, do you know why he said, "Hey, brother, I'm going to grab a Pop-Tart"? Because he was afraid to say, "Hey, man, do you mind if I have one of your Pop-Tarts?" And if he was afraid for me to say no. That's why. It wasn't because he was trying to be a dick. It wasn't because he was trying to overpower me. It was because he was so afraid to be vulnerable that it was easier for him just to hide behind what seemed like arrogance. And that's really, again, there's the...
Wouldn't you call that entitlement more than arrogance?
I think that's what arrogance is. I think it's
They're
all
very
the same,
similar, yeah.
the same flavor. But I just think it's like, okay, what's the opposite of arrogance? Humility. What's the opposite of entitlement? What's the opposite of arrogance? Vulnerability. What's the opposite of entitlement? Humility.
I think the opposite of entitlement is gratitude.
Fair. Doesn't really work into the concept I'm trying to create here, so I'm gonna have to disagree with you strongly. But that's my goal in today's episode is, I don't know, can you see that? When someone is being arrogant, are you able to see where it's actually coming from? just because there are some people that are arrogant. I would say, like, I've met some people who they're just arrogant. But I've also met some people who I've had really powerful conversations with, and then you see them in a certain light in a certain situation where they are arrogant. And it's not because they want to be arrogant, it's because it's a coping mechanism for something else. It's a safety.
Yeah.
It's a safety thing. Are you able to figure out what they're trying to find safety from? Is my goal in today's episode.
Nice. Well, it's always an overcorrection. Ego, arrogance, it's the pufferfish and the turtle. The turtle runs away or hides or shrinks. The pufferfish puffs up because it's so afraid it's not strong. And the pufferfish only puffs up when there's a predator.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times people who puff up around you and seem really arrogant or entitled or toxic, they are actually just really insecure. Whenever you poke a topic that someone is like a soft spot, you can tell their reaction. They'll either shrink and be a turtle and kind of hide from it or avoid it, or they'll leave the room, or they'll puff up and get angry. And so, yeah, it's just a trauma response. And all ego is always a trauma response from insecurity. What's a good example of this? I remember I was watching someone by the lake. Emilia's family has a place on a lake that's absolutely gorgeous in Otis, Massachusetts. And I remember I was watching him, and he was doing something with the boat, and he got really angry at the person who, you know how you have to tie the boat to the dock? That whole thing?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And he got like really angry, and I realized why. He got really triggered and angry, kind of all of a sudden, almost like, what the? Everything's fine. But I realized why. He was shirtless, and he's insecure about his physique. What's a good example of this? Everyone's had this moment where they're in a bathing suit, and they have just their stomach just overflow. It's just bad angle. It's not a great moment. You can either be very, very docile and humble and maybe even overly mousy, timid, or you can puff up, and that's the kind of thing. So whenever someone's insecure, they almost always puff up or go docile.
They do something.
Yeah, they do something. There's always a response. Yeah.
I had a buddy of mine. It was always so funny. Back in the day, this was years and years ago. But he could drive before I could drive. So he drove everywhere. I drove to school with him every day. He could drive long before I could drive. And there was always this thing where if he was trying to do something challenging, like back into a spot or anything that made him nervous, I couldn't have a conversation with him because he would just say, what? Because he was so triggered in that moment that he could not pay attention to me. That was like his tell. Yep. It was like, oh, you're insecure right now based on something that's going on. I got that a little bit with Taryn in Scotland because there was it was just brutal. Oh my God, it was so bad. We went to where was it? Was it Aberdeen? I don't know. We went to Scotland. We went to a town, a city, a place in Scotland, and we were trying to go to dinner, and we're following the GPS, and it's taking us down this like one-way thing. And I was like, babe, do you think is this like a street? And then we saw some Ubers, so I was like, okay, this must be a street. And I went by this car, and I was like super nervous that I was going to hit it, and he was honking at me, and it was like, this is too much. I pull out onto a street, and the street is closed. This giant downtown center is shut down. I'm the only car driving through the center of town on a street that's not open. There's people like hanging out in the middle of the street, and I was losing my mind. I'm sure I was super insecure. I'm sure I definitely wasn't centered, Kev. I was losing my mind. So I think that's just this is a really good episode about, it's an explanation, not an excuse. The explanation is I was super triggered. My state was off. I was driving through the center of town on a road that was closed, and I think I did something very illegal. And everybody's looking at me. I'm the only car driving because there's no way to get on the street other than this alleyway. The street's shut down, so everybody's looking at me as I drive down the street. I'm, hey guys, how are you? Cool,
Embarrassment is such a brutal experience. Yeah.
It's brutal.
So what do you do in moments like that? That's because the trauma responses are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fight is puff up. Flight is run away and avoid. You couldn't run away. You can't puff up because you're going to be mean to Taryn.
Yeah.
Which is not aligned. You can't, fight, flight, freeze. You can't freeze because you have to perform.
There was a moment of, when I was turning onto the street, there was a moment of freeze and look around and say, like, what's going on here?
Yeah. And then fawn would be just appease.
I think it was fawn. Like,
yeah, so you're just appeasing all the people. Yeah.
I'm sorry. My bad.
Yeah, my bad.
It's like when you cut someone off in traffic and they honk at you. Okay, I cut you off. I could very easily stick my finger out the window at you and say, "Oh, screw you." Sometimes I'll literally be like, "Yeah, it's on me." Yep. That's my bad. That's my bad. So I think that's a version of fawning. I think the best way is to laugh away the pain. It's very hard to do that in real time.
NLU listener, what is happening? I just wanted to jump in here and let you know, if you want to get to the next level faster, we have a free virtual monthly meetup at the first Thursday of every month, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can connect with like-minded people and become a bigger part of this amazing global community. The link to register will be in the show notes. Is there a way to recognize the trauma response and then shift into centered energy? That's what I've been working on a lot. I think that's what emotional intelligence really is. Emotional adaptability, I guess, is the proper term. But Emilia and I have never fought. And when she first said we were never going to fight, I remember thinking, no way. Yeah. We're going to be together forever. I can't not fight ever. Because truth be told, I'm intense. I like to have healthy discords. I like to learn about what could or couldn't be right. That's like me going into business with you, Kevin, saying we're never going to fight. We've had a couple tough moments that I would consider close to fighting. Also, one of them close to actually fighting. Physically fighting. But when Emilia said that, I remember thinking, that seems impossible to me. And it's actually worked. Holy crap, mostly because of her. Now, how did that work? Number one, she's super emotionally regulated. Number two, I've worked really hard on shifting my trauma responses. So whenever I do the fight trauma response of, like, you've ever been in an argument with someone where they think they're more accurate than you think you're more accurate than them, so it's escalate, and it's just shots fired. We call them stingers. Don't throw stingers in your relationship. And every now and then you're like, why did I say that? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. That's not what I mean. And it's only funny after. At the time, it's not. Yeah. When you are in that puffer fish energy, you have to go vulnerable. And it's not easy because you're in shame of how you're acting like a dingus. And so that's vulnerability has been one of the biggest game changers of all time, because there are times where she escalates, I escalate, she escalates. She'll say, I think you're escalating. So she'll say things like, I don't really like the tone. Can we just de-escalate? And then I go vulnerable. So that's my trigger to go vulnerable. Yeah, you're okay. And then I take a second. We've no storming out, no slamming doors, no yelling ever. It's been unbelievable, genuinely unbelievable, meaning I didn't believe it. Now, will I have my track record forever? I don't know. Will we have the never fight thing? I don't know. We've been close a few times, okay? But the point of this is the only reason why I can do that is because of emotional adaptability, which is, number one, recognize that you're triggered. Number two, recognize which trigger. Am I fawning right now or am I puffing? And then shift into centered energy, which is through vulnerability, which is, and this is why it's so hard, because look at how complex this is already. You have to take ownership for your part, or you have to allow, and my analogy is volcano. You can let the lava leak out via tears, or you can let it explode, which is bad for everyone and destroys the island or the relationship in this metaphor, or you can suppress it, which is what most people do, and that, what does that do? Creates more pressure, and then it explodes later. And when we're insecure, and this is the best analogy I've ever heard, metaphor upon metaphor upon metaphor. Wayne Dyer used to say this. He used to say, you're never going to get apple juice out of an orange. Why? Because when life squeezes you, you get what's inside. You get out what's inside. And so if you've been harboring resentment, and here's the problem, a lot of times you don't know you have. Yep. Oh, yeah? Well, I don't like it when you And it's like, whoa, how long you been holding on to that? And so a lot of times this stuff builds beneath the surface and then it explodes later. And so how can you be emotionally intelligent enough to really express yourself along the way so that you don't create this massive pressure beneath the surface that eventually just hurts people?
I think that's why asking for help is so important. It's very vulnerable, but it really, the lesson I learned from being super stressed out, because I drive everywhere. I love driving. I don't ever want Taryn to drive us anywhere. I love driving. I'm a huge fan of it. Over there, I didn't like it as much because it was super stressful. It just got to the point where I said, hey, babe, I need you. I need you. If she was like getting ready to drift off, I need you. I just need you for a minute. We're going to do something here. I'm not sure how it's going to go. I just kind of need you. I need some support. I just need some moral support. Second pair of eyes. Nice. The roundabouts there. I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Most men wouldn't do that because asking for help means you're weak and
incompetent. I was weak and incompetent driving there, so I needed all the assistance I could get.
But for the listeners, anyone, this is such an interesting thing. It's very hard for the male ego. I'll speak for men because I am one. It's very hard for the male ego to admit when they suck at something or they need help or they are incompetent. Because when you look incompetent, you feel weak, you feel less than. There's something weird about that. That's why I've coached several men, but it's been harder to coach men because they don't want to lose credibility. It's this. I have several men that I coach, but one I'm thinking of, I can tell he doesn't want to go too deep. He doesn't want me to find out that he actually is deeply fearful about a lot of stuff. And over time, as we build trust, the vulnerability increases, but it's not like with women. With women, they feel safer typically, again, statistically. I'm not trying to do the male-female thing here, but yeah. I do think vulnerability tends to be harder for men, particularly in our culture. It's definitely was hard for me. I didn't even learn about vulnerability till I was 29. I remember we did a small talks episode, and I was like, "What is that? What does vulnerability mean again?" Like I've never really thought about it much.
Isn't that wild?
It's wild. Yeah. Talk about a game changer.
Only 6 years ago.
Life changing. If you can't own it, hey, I need you, dude. Not a lot of men would do that. They would just pretend that they're good. We're good. And then something would go wrong.
Yeah.
And then they wouldn't take ownership and they'd blame the female. Dude, that's that crap. And that's called emotional immaturity. I'm actually about to read 4 books on emotional immaturity. Emilia recommended them yesterday. And when I say 4 books, I mean over the next several months. I'm not just going to read 4 books.
Tonight?
But I texted... tonight I'm going to read 4 books. No, I texted her them because I wanted to remember. Ready? These are the 4 books. It's a woman named... It doesn't give me the author. Hold on.
Less than ideal.
Hold on. Lindsay Gibson. Many of our listeners will know her. This is the titles. Disentangling from Emotionally Immature People. Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. Self-Care for Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And Recovering from Emotionally Immature Parents. So 2 guesses what her specialty is, which is emotional immaturity. But Emilia, I didn't know what emotional immaturity, it wasn't on my radar until we did a relationship talks event about it. I know we got to jump. Yeah. I would say the main reason why Emilia and I have not been able to fight, if I could condense it into one thing for our listeners or anyone watching, I've tried to work on my emotional immaturity. I was emotionally immature more than I thought. I don't think necessarily more than most men, but more than I thought. And ever since that got on my radar, it's been a different life.
Last thing I'll say, because when I go on other shows, I tell my story, sitting on the edge of a bed, contemplating suicide, having suicidal ideations, not wanting to be here. And I always say, I reached out to Alan. And people say, how did you have the courage? How did you have the courage to ask for help? And I never had a good answer. It's like, I don't know. I don't know. Alan and I were tight. We were buddies. I trusted Alan. I felt safe. I said, you know what the truth is? Alan and I had already been vulnerable with each other for a year up to that point. I said, the best time to create an umbrella is not when you're stuck out in a thunderstorm. It's when there's no rain. So that would be my lesson for everyone is if you struggle to be vulnerable, practice vulnerability when you don't feel like you need to be.
Yeah.
When it's easy, practice it. I don't know what that means for you, but go ahead. You had something quickly?
The very last thing was, it's interesting, and maybe this is selfish of me in this moment, but it's interesting that we were so vulnerable before I even knew what it was. That's one of those weird things for me where I was a vulnerable man in many regards without ever knowing what the hell it was.
I think you were a very courageous man, and I think that courage lent itself to vulnerability.
But
You're
not
always
with
about
everyone,
what's
not
real.
with everyone. I
Yeah,
feel
that's
like it
fair.
was more with you probably than others. But
Maybe.
at the end of the day, yeah, that's fascinating. So
I thought you were going to say what made you reach out to me, and I was going to tell you the 7 other people I called before you didn't pick up. So you just picked you picked up. That's not true.
I was 7th on the list.
8th.
It's so funny. Some
8th.
people would be so offended by that. I'd be like,
8th.
oh, thank
The
you
first
for
7 didn't pick. You were 8th.
Oh, okay. I was
Yeah,
8th.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Numbers. No, you were the
Yeah.
first one. The first and only. Okay, if you have not joined Next Level Nation yet, please do so. We had somebody who commented on one of our YouTube videos. They said, I love what you're doing. Keep up the good work. It's been so beneficial. I said, we have a private Facebook group if you want to join. I think she actually joined today, so shout out to Evelyn, I think it is. If I am mispronouncing your name, I'm just doing it off of my brain power, which I have very little of right now. Tomorrow for episode number 1722, the 2 types of imposter syndrome. As always, we love you. We appreciate you. Grateful for each and every one of you. And at NLU, we do not have fans. We have family. We will talk to you all tomorrow.